Welcome to this explainer. I'm here on behalf of Forge College, and man, am I excited to dive into this with you today. Grab your favorite drafting pen because we are going to decode the absolute bedrock of Web3 architecture, Solana account fundamentals. If you've been racking your brain trying to figure out how this ridiculously fast network actually stores its state under the hood, and how it's just completely different from everything we're used to, well, you are in exactly the right place. Let's get into it.
Okay, here is our blueprint for today. First, the EVM to SVM transition. Second, the core 5 fields. Third, lockboxes and landlords. Fourth, Ethereum versus Solana accounts. And finally, practical design choices.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the EVM to SVM transition, bridging the gap from Ethereum state to Solana accounts.
Now, just a quick recap to set the stage. In our previous explainer, Synthesis, from concepts to design decisions, we established a pretty major architectural checkpoint. Smaller, highly focused accounts actually reduce parallelization conflicts. Breaking up state so transactions don't just triple over each other, that is the absolute secret sauce for Solana's blistering speed. But that leaves us with this massive mechanical mystery. How exactly does Solana physically hold on to this partitioned state at the hardware level? Well, let's crack open the casing and take a look.
Moving right along to Section 2, the core 5 fields, the structural blueprint of a Solana account.
Okay, so every single Solana account on the network is built on this exact 5-field blueprint. Literally no exceptions. Together, these determine identity, storage, and authority. First, you have the public key. This is your account's unique identifier, kind of like its address on the network. Second, the lamports. That's the native balance, but critically, it's also your rent money. Third is the data, just an opaque, fixed-sized byte array where your actual state, your variables, live. Fourth, the owner. This is the specific smart contract or program that has exclusive authority to write to or mutate that data. And fifth, the executable flag, which is just a simple true or false Boolean telling the network whether the account is holding static data or runnable code.
Now, here is where things get really interesting. Reallocation. Say you want to increase an account's data size. You can't just magically shove more bytes in there dynamically. No way. You have to explicitly reallocate the space, which means you have to deposit additional lamports to cover the extra rent. So unlike the Ethereum virtual machine, which is sort of a pay-once, gas-only model for execution, Solana's storage persistence actually has this strict, ongoing economic dimension. Storage isn't just empty space. It is an active lease.
Which naturally brings us to Section 3, Lockboxes and Landlords, a concrete metaphor for Solana state. All right, imagine the entire Solana runtime as this massive industrial storage facility. In this place, an account is literally just a secure, physical lockbox. Your public key? That's simply the address painted on the front of that box in dark green ink. The data is the physical box capacity, like how much stuff you can literally cram inside. The lamports are the prepaid rent taped directly to the inside lid of the box. And the owner? The owner is just the locksmith. It's the specific program with the unique combination to open that box. But remember this, the locksmith doesn't actually own the prepaid rent inside the user's box. They just have the authority to open it up and rearrange the contents.
So if we're dealing with a storage facility, it naturally begs a pretty provocative question. What exactly happens when that prepaid rent, those lamports taped to the lid, eventually runs out?
Well, the Solana runtime acts as a completely ruthless digital landlord. If your lockbox doesn't hold enough lamports to maintain rent exemption for its specific size, the landlord will literally reclaim the box and throw your precious data out on the digital street. It gets completely zeroed out. Gone. Poof. So, the absolute golden rule of the storage facility is always maintain rent exemption.
And what about that executable flag we mentioned earlier? Think of those as special dark green boxes in our facility. When that flag is set to true, the box doesn't hold ordinary goods or user data, it contains runnable code. It's the machinery itself. You can't just freely mutate data in these special boxes like a normal storage unit. Invoking them actually requires a completely different runtime path.
All right, Section 4, Ethereum versus Solana accounts, rethinking storage and state.
This beautifully illustrates the paradigm shift we're talking about. Look at the Ethereum EVM side. It's like a leased apartment with highly flexible internal storage. The renter interacts via the front door, and the space just kind of expands dynamically as you add variables. Contrast that with the Solana SVM. It is a strict storage facility with fixed-sized lockboxes. Expanding your box requires explicit reallocation and putting more rent money down up front. It is a massive shift from implicit dynamic storage to explicit, strictly budgeted containers.
Let's look at how this plays out in a classic ERC20 token contract. On Ethereum, you just have one single smart contract, holding a giant, flexible mapping of user addresses to their balances. Simple, right? But on Solana, that single mapping must be physically fractured into 3 distinct accounts. First, a mint account for the token metadata and total supply. Second, individual per-holder token accounts for each user's specific balance. And third, the program account that actually holds the executable rules for transferring the token. Each of these is a separate lockbox, and crucially, every single one of them requires its own separate rent deposit.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Practical Design Choices, Balancing Rent and Contention.
Now, what's really fascinating about this trade-off matrix is the balance between performance and economics. If you choose a strategy with many small accounts, your rent cost is inherently high, right? You have to fund all those individual lockboxes. However, your contention is low, which means parallel execution runs blazingly fast. On the flip side, if you use shared accounts, your rent cost is low because there are fewer boxes to fund, but your contention risk completely skyrockets, potentially bottlenecking your performance because everyone is trying to write to the exact same box at the exact same time. It's the ultimate balancing act. More lockboxes equal better performance, but way higher rent budgets.
So if we distill all of this engineering down into one absolute, non-negotiable golden rule for Solana developers, it's this: allocate enough lamports to meet rent exemption for any account you rely on for persistent state. It's just the uncompromising economic reality of the SVM state. Pay your digital landlord upfront, or you risk losing your data entirely.
But, this does leave us with a pretty fascinating puzzle. If programs are just locksmiths, how do they assert deterministic ownership over derived accounts without keeping track of a million separate keys? Well, that is exactly the mystery we're going to decode next time in our deep dive on the account ownership and permission model. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. As a quick reminder, this material was brought to you by Forge College. For more in-depth Web3 educational resources, definitely head over to forge.college. Keep building, keep those lockboxes fully funded, and I will see you in the next one.